I work in the outdoor field and lead trips regularly. I once led a trip to the top of Mount Sterling in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top, about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle school kids and had one co-instructor. We were camping out on top of the mountain, and it was a beautiful night with a full moon. The kids and the other co-instructor went to bed in their tents. I chose to spend the night in a hammock. I was really into a book I was reading, so I stayed up and read until about 10:30 p.m. I turned my headlamp off to settle in for the night. Everything around me was rather bright from the moon, and from the position I was in, I could see down the trail we had hiked to get to the top. I laid there, enjoying the scenery, and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in the area, so I perked up. As it got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere, and there was somebody hiking up the trail with no headlamp on or any gear. I was just frozen, watching this person move closer to our camp. They arrived at the top of the mountain, where we were, and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man surveying our camp. I really could only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but may have been 10. He then turned, sat down under a tree facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that I knew he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there, staring at our camp. I had no idea what to do, so I decided to wait it out. I waited, just staring at the man while he stared at my camp. This went on till about 3:30 a.m. Then, he stood up, took a moment to survey my camp a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail he came upon. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about, but it freaked me out. I was paranoid that we were being followed for the rest of the trip. A couple of years ago, I went camping with my brother and old roommate of mine. This was in one of the national forests in Oregon. We were pretty high up, kind of near an old ghost town. Not really a dangerous area, but there are a lot of black bears and some cougars. I set up my hammock with the tarp draped over to keep the rain out. Then, I got pretty drunk and went to bed. Well, since I drank my weight in beer, I woke up in the middle of the night and had to pee. I lifted up the tarp to peek out with a flashlight, and that's when I saw 2 eyes staring back at me. They were about 20 feet away. I was using one of those stupid $2 hardware store LED lights, so it didn't throw a beam. So I couldn't see what was behind the eyes. All I could see was that they were far apart. My first instinct was to turn off the light and stay where I was. But it was so close, and that I wouldn't be able to see it. We had 3 guns, but I left mine in the truck. I came to the conclusion that the only thing to do was to stay perfectly still and keep the light on so I could see it. So, I draped my other leg out of the hammock and was ready to bolt for the truck if it charged me. I stayed in this position for what felt like forever, until I noticed that the eyes had not moved at all. So I took a chance. I slowly got out of the hammock and began moving around the eyes, keeping about 20 feet between us. I was moving towards the truck. Once I got to the side, I saw it. It was a pair of binoculars, left open, sitting on a stump. With a light, they reflected just like a pair of eyes. And in my half-drunk state, it never occurred to me that this could possibly be it. I put the binoculars away and went to sleep. I know that this isn't actually a dangerous experience. I've actually encountered wild animals before, but this is by far the most scared I've ever been, and for the most amount of time, of course. I'm a seasonal ranger for my local forest district. Despite the fact that I live in a fairly suburban area, the forest preserves still make up about 12% of the county, with much of the property being heavily wooded. Not far out wilderness, but pretty secluded in some areas. Being a seasonal employee, I've been on the job for a bit over a month now, but in my short time here, I've found 3 things. Number 1, a dead man in a tree. The rest of the rangers say they find about 1 suicide a year, so here was the one for the year. When we go around opening parks each day, we drive through to make sure everything is okay. In this instance, I was driving through and had just lost sight of the road when I saw a man hanging from a tree in a clearing. He had hung himself. I called the cops and the coroner. Friggin' coroner took an hour to show up, and he was the only one with a ladder long enough to cut the guy down. So I stared at a dead guy in a tree for about an hour. Number 2, crazed, drugged up, naked man running around a parking lot. Took me and 3 other rangers to catch the guy, and when we finally caught him, found out he had multiple cuts across his body from running through brush and rock lodged firmly up his, well, I'll let you guess. Number 3, headless deer. Normally, when a pack of coyotes take down a deer, yes, we have a bunch of coyotes around here, they leave bite marks all over the body, along with torn off flesh everywhere. But the head was cleanly sliced off and placed directly next to the body, meaning this is something created by human intervention. We still haven't figured out that one yet, and I've only been on the job for 5 weeks. I live in northeast Oklahoma, and I consider myself a camping and fishing enthusiast. One spring night, me and 2 friends decided to go fishing. It's around midnight, and we're going to a place that was once a maintained primitive camping area. This is not a remote location, but it's not very well known either. As we approach the turnoff for our spot, we see another vehicle slowly turning out off of it and proceeding in the way in which we came. We pass them, and a friend says how he figured no one else would be around. We get to our spot, get our gear out, and begin to prepare. But as we chat, drink a few beers, we all notice an unspoken easiness. Something is just not right. Usually, I'm a trooper, fishing until the sun comes up, but I'm the first to crack. I explain to my friends how I feel, that we should leave, and I just have a bad feeling. They agree. We load up. While slowly driving through the old campground, we notice some brightly glowing embers in an area where nobody has been. My friend driving stops without even thinking and goes for a look. He is startled, telling us to come see. What we saw was the remains of 3 crosses, made of wood that would stand about 12 inches if upright. But they had been burned, along with a small campfire. And to make it even better, all were lying on freshly turned soil, which resembled a freshly dug grave. We freaked, got the hell out of there fast. Thank you, sweet baby Jesus. We are home free, we all thought. When we approached the exit of the old campground, we noticed a vehicle parked on the side of the road. We passed it, and we all realize it's the same car we passed on the way in. There was nobody in the car. They had doubled back and were likely watching us, waiting to do who knows what. Not a pro, but more than 1,000 days in the backcountry over the past decade. I have always been drawn to the wild. It seems like home, and I generally know my neighbors out there. Not afraid to be in the deep woods, in the dark. I love my woods. One sunny weekend afternoon, I had dirt biked up an old mining road. It gained a couple thousand feet from the valley floor towards one of the ridges of the Cascades. When the road gave out near the bottom of a high basin, I put my backpack and started off cross-country toward the ridge. It was still heavily forested, old growth and old cut fading in another 1,000 feet into those scraggly wind-blown ones near the top. About 20 minutes in, and about a half mile up from me, near the tree line, I heard this thumping sound. It was very odd, so I stopped to listen carefully. It sounded like a big, solid branch was being whacked against a solid tree. I use the term solid because the hits were powerful. One or both of the pieces of wood were hard and dry. The wood resonated and rang on impact as dry wood will. I couldn't get over the power though. It sounded like somebody was swinging a 4-inch post. Weird, right? Well, it gets better. This someone sounded like they were trying to communicate. The thumping had a very complex and well-defined pattern. And here's the weirdest part. The thumping signal occasionally became very rapid, like what a drummer could do if they were noodling around with a stick. But I swear, it sounded like a 4-inch post was being treated as lightly as a drumstick. I listened for maybe 5 minutes, just fascinated with the sound, this code and the power of it. Then, the drumming suddenly stopped, and I kind of woke up to the fear of this unknown thing out there. I had my pistol, I had my bear spray, and my knife. I really only fear cougars, and even then, I figured they'll have a bad day trying to take me down. Still, the silence as I stared into the forest ahead seemed loaded, and I turned on my heels and left that valley. That place and that experience just gave me the chills, and that high valley won't ever see my shadow again. I have read stories about some of the native people around here having valleys that they just wouldn't go into. I can now easily understand how these legends get started. It was unusually warm to be mid-December on this day, and me and my buddy were hunting in an area known as Chiloe. It was about an hour before sunset when we climbed out of our deer stands. I met my buddy in a little holler, about 100 yards away from both of our tree stands. We were walking back to the four-wheeler when we heard a very low rumble in the holler that we had just met in. We were now at this time about 35 yards from the holler, almost in a field. So we thought we would be real still and sit on the edge of the field for a minute and see if we could hear anything else. At this time, we were thinking it was just a grunt or a blow from a deer that had scared. We waited probably 10 minutes before we heard a loud splash in a little drinking hole. Me and my buddy looked over at each other and said, "What the hell is that?" So we waited another minute, still hoping that a deer would come out. Then we heard a second splash. At this time, we realized it was not a deer. So we walked probably 20 yards and saw what we believe was to be a big hairy beast. It was approximately 8 feet tall and around 350 pounds. Me and my friend were almost in shock at what we had seen. This Bigfoot creature saw us and actually didn't even seem to care that we were watching it. It just kind of lingered there in the area for another minute before walking over a small ridge where we lost sight of it. And to be honest, he kind of just lingered there around the area for another minute before walking over a small ridge where we lost sight of it. And to be honest, we were too scared to go and look for it. So we went back to the house and told everybody there. But they said we were crazy and that it was just a bear. I've been hunting bear for years and I am familiar with their movements. This was no bear. I know this because it never dropped down on all fours of its feet the whole time we watched it, and we probably saw it walk a total of 30 to 40 yards, but I am 100% certain that it was no bear. It was some sort of human-ape creature. I am positive. So is my buddy. Back in the summer of 1995, myself and 4 friends were camping at the base of a mountain in our town in eastern Tennessee. Normal night with our friends until the campfire died down. We were on an old road bed and had been breaking all kinds of dead trees for fire. As we were doing this, a lost hunting dog came to us. When it did, we gave it some peanut butter, and the poor starving thing ate, and then carried off the plastic jar. We didn't think anything else of him until a few hours later. The fire began dying down, and me and 3 of my friends were sitting, leaning against the embankment, as the dog came running back to us, shivering. Well, we were all kind of like, what the hell? I'm getting chills as I type this. We were looking in the direction where the dog came from, and we saw this large dark shadow just out of sight, and just out of the light. Just out of our clear vision from the fire. Me and all my friends froze. The dog was whimpering, and that's not normal for a coon dog. We saw the shadow turn towards us, and we all saw the reflection of its eyes. It paused to look for all of us for 45 seconds, and then, like it was shot out of a cannon, this loud sound like it was running through the woods, breaking trees at this point. Fear had overwhelmed all of us. We had been in the area of woods many times over the years, built large fires as large as we could, and none of us slept the rest of that night. When we saw what we considered to be a Bigfoot, there was this terrible wet animal smell. It was unmistakable. To this day, I have never smelled an animal like it since. Approximately 3 to 4 years later, me and one of the guys were at the top of the mountain, not far from there, at a large natural sand cave and a large waterfall. We got bored as people do that age, and went to the top of the sand cave to sit at the edge of the waterfall. As we climbed up to the top, we had that same smell hit us, and that same type of destruction was present. Trees about 3.5 to 4 feet up were just broken off, like the first time we ever encountered this. We looked around and followed the path as far as we could until it ran out. We all still talk about this to this day, and we all get cold chills when we do. My wife was going to work around the end of July in 2002 and saw something by the side of the road. It was tall and dark colored. She slowed down because she thought it was somebody who might have broken down. The thing was at the edge of the road near a creek. As she stopped, it crossed the road and leapt onto a dirt bank, about 5 to 6 feet off the road, and went into the woods. A day or two later, as she was going to work, she saw something standing by the edge of the road in the same area. It was tall and dark, with reddish eyes. It made no effort to come into the road, and went back into the woods. All of these events occurred during the early morning hours on a remote section of mountainous road in Stony Creek, section of Carter County, on Highway 91. On August 1st, 2002, I was letting my dog out of the house because I thought he had to go to the bathroom. My female dog would not leave the house, and my male dog went onto the porch and stared at a field adjacent to my house. This was 3 in the morning. He would not leave the porch, and his ruff was up, and he would growl really low. I looked around and saw something in the field, about 2 o'clock from my elevated position. I could not get a direct look at what it was, but it was large enough to be seen bent over in a field of nearly mature untopped tobacco. When it realized it was spotted, it made a chuffing noise, between a growl and a guttural throat sound. At this time, I noticed another figure in the field moving off into a shadowy area between a barn and a road behind my location. This was a smaller version of what was in the field near me. The thing in the field, from me, stayed there until the thing that had crossed the road made a similar chuffing sound. The dogs behind my location and in the area where this was happened were barking. The thing in the field then began to move through the tobacco field to the tall grass and finally to the tree line. I also heard a noise like something in pain, something small. This was followed by 2 additional series of sounds coming from an area near the creek across the road from us. This was answered by the things that had crossed through the field at my location. The only thing I got a good look at was a rounded back covered with a brownish red or light brown fur. This again happened at night, and the lighting was not bad. There was also partial moon and ambient light from the property nearby. I checked the area when I observed the things in the following morning, and found areas of mashed up grass and trails that roughly followed the sounds I had heard the previous night. What was unusual was that I got the impression that there was a young animal of some kind hurt. It was a mewling sound that was kind of scared that I heard the area of the second thing. I did not find any footprints that could properly be identified. I did find depressions in the grass and trails through, and the still wet grass where something had moved. I also was surprised that the things seemed to communicate with each other. One of the things that is not seen or seemed to be angry or upset about something. Also, the things that did not cross the road but stayed in or around the creek seemed to be looking for something. They even went so far as to climb or attempt to climb a tree. My wife and I noticed a tree by the creek moving and swaying as if somebody were climbing it. There was not enough wind to move the tree, and there was also a strong musty odor when the breeze changed and blew in our direction. August of 1984. When I was about 15, 3 of my friends and I were camping in the woods above my house. We had 2 dogs, a collie and a female husky. We had built a lean-to and to sleep under it. We were just talking about things, girls and such, when one of my friends let us know that he heard something. We just laughed at him. About 2 or 3 minutes later, 2 of my friends claimed to have heard the same noise as the 2 of us that did not hear it. So, we started making fun of them. About 5 minutes after that, our dogs began pacing back and forth, acting strange. Then, all at once, a loud yell came from behind the lean-to, and it shook hard. I could see it visibly shaking. We all ran, except for one, and he froze and could not move. We ran through the pitch-black woods, hitting trees and running through briars. When we got out of the woods, we turned and noticed that our friend was not with us. We yelled for him, and about 2 minutes later, he came out of the woods, carrying his collie in his arms. I never knew what that thing was, but my friend said that he could not see it, but that he could hear it behind him, making a grunting sound as he sat in front of the fire, and he could hear it behind him, walking as he walked out of the woods, some distance behind him. We went back the next day with an adult to retrieve our sleeping bags and things that our lean-to had been torn down. The rocks we had for the fire pit were scattered. The whole area smelled 10 times worse than a wet dog.